On his daughter's 6th birthday, Marcus Bennett walked into the most expensive restaurant in Manhattan, carrying a homemade cupcake in a plastic container. All he wanted was one special dinner. But the manager blocked his path, looked at his worn shoes, and said those words. "Perhaps you should try somewhere more suitable, sir." Lily squeezed her father's hand, her eyes already red, whispering that it was okay. They could leave. And then, from the VIP section, Victoria Hartwell stood up, the most powerful woman in that room, and said something that made the entire restaurant go silent. 3 hours before that moment at the restaurant, Marcus Bennett stood in the tiny kitchen of his queen's apartment, carefully frosting a cupcake. The icing was slightly uneven. He had never been good at this, but he had watched 3 tutorial videos and bought the expensive vanilla extract, the one Sarah used to insist on. On the counter beside him sat a small wrapped box containing a teddy bear he had found at a thrift store in Brooklyn. It was practically new, still had the tag on it. The woman at the register had smiled when he told her it was for his daughter's birthday. Lily appeared in the doorway, wearing her favorite dress, the blue one with white flowers that Sarah had bought 2 years ago. It was getting too small now, the hem riding above her knees, but she refused to let Marcus give it away. She looked at the cupcake with wide eyes and asked where they were going tonight. Marcus told her it was a surprise, somewhere special, and watched her face light up in a way that made the past 3 months of saving worth every skipped lunch. He had put away $20 each week from his paycheck, sometimes $30 when he picked up extra jobs on weekends, 12-hour days fixing pipes in Manhattan, high rises, coming home with aching knees and grease under his fingernails. The stack of medical bills sat in a drawer in his bedroom, hidden from Lily, still unpaid. Sarah's treatment had cost more than he would ever be able to repay, but he had stopped opening those envelopes months ago. Tonight was not about debt. Tonight was about his daughter, turning 6 years old. On the wall above the small dining table hung a photograph of Sarah holding Lily as a baby. She was laughing in the picture, her hair falling across her face, completely unaware of the cells already multiplying wrong inside her body. Lily had been 4 when she died. Sometimes Marcus caught his daughter staring at that photo, trying to remember things she was too young to hold on to. Across the city, in a corner office 47 floors above Midtown Manhattan, Victoria Hartwell was ending a meeting that had lasted 3 hours too long. The director of acquisitions sat across from her, his face pale, while she explained in precise terms why his performance had fallen below acceptable standards. There was no anger in her voice, no emotion at all. She had learned long ago that power was most effective when delivered cold. The man cleared out his desk within the hour. Her assistant appeared at the door with a tablet in hand, reminding her about dinner at Le Ciel with the London partners. Victoria glanced at the window, at the city stretching out below her wrapped in Christmas lights. December in New York. Everyone had somewhere to be, someone to see. She told her assistant she would leave in 20 minutes and turned back to the stack of contracts on her desk. There was a photograph beside her computer that she rarely looked at anymore. A 7-year-old girl with messy braids standing in a cramped kitchen in Brooklyn, her mother's arm around her shoulders. That kitchen had smelled like fried onions and cheap soap. Her mother had worked double shifts at a diner 6 blocks away, coming home with tips that barely covered rent. Her father had left on that girl's 7th birthday, walked out the door, and never came back. Victoria had built her entire life to make sure no one would ever have the power to leave her again. Le Ciel occupied the top floor of a building on the Upper East Side, the kind of place where a glass of wine cost more than most people's grocery bills. When Marcus and Lily walked through the front door, the warmth hit them first, then the soft piano music, then the smell of food that Marcus could not identify. Lily squeezed his hand and whispered that it was so beautiful in here, her voice filled with wonder. The manager intercepted them before they made it 5 steps inside. Mr. Preston was tall and thin, with a practiced smile that did not reach his eyes. He asked if they had a reservation. Marcus said they did not, but gestured toward the dining room where at least 8 tables sat empty. He explained that it was his daughter's birthday, that they only needed a small table, that they would not take long. Preston's gaze moved slowly from Marcus's face to his worn dress shirt, to his scuffed shoes, to the plastic container in his hand. The cupcake. Marcus felt heat rising in his chest, but kept his voice steady. He said, "Please." He said his daughter had been looking forward to this all week. Around them, diners at nearby tables had begun to turn and stare, their conversations dropping to whispers. The manager's expression did not change. He said he was terribly sorry, that it was restaurant policy, reservations only. Then he added, with a slight tilt of his head, that perhaps they might find somewhere more suitable elsewhere. The word suitable hung in the air like an insult dressed in silk. Lily tugged at Marcus's sleeve. Her voice was very small when she told him it was okay, that they could go, that she did not mind. But her eyes were already red, and Marcus could see her fighting not to cry, trying so hard to be brave for him. It broke something in his chest. He had promised her a special night, and he could not even get her through the door. He was turning to leave when he heard heels clicking against marble. A woman's voice cut through the quiet murmur of the restaurant, sharp and clear, calling the manager's name. Preston's face went white. Victoria Hartwell had been sitting alone at the best table in the room, her London partners having cancelled at the last minute. She had watched the entire exchange without much interest at first. She had seen this kind of thing before, the quiet cruelty of places like this. But then the little girl had turned around, and for one brief moment, her eyes met Victoria's. There was no anger in that child's face, no accusation. Just a silent disappointment, a sadness too heavy for someone so small. And suddenly, Victoria was 7 years old again, standing outside a restaurant in Manhattan with her mother, being told they could not afford to eat there. Her mother's hand trembling as she led her away, promising they would find somewhere else, somewhere better. The memory hit her like a physical blow. She was on her feet before she realized she had decided to move. She walked to where Preston stood frozen and told him these 2 guests would be sitting with her. The manager started to protest, something about policy, about other guests. But Victoria silenced him with a look. She said she did not remember asking for his opinion, and her voice was cold enough to freeze the air between them. The entire restaurant had gone silent. Marcus looked at her, confused and wary. He told her she did not have to do this. Victoria turned to face him directly for the first time, and something in her expression softened just slightly when she looked at Lily. She said she knew she did not have to, but today was his daughter's birthday, and no one should ever be turned away on their birthday. Lily looked up at this strange woman in the expensive dress, with something like hope flickering in her eyes. Victoria extended her hand toward the dining room. Marcus hesitated for a long moment, his pride warring with the look on his daughter's face. Then he nodded once and followed Victoria to her table, Lily's small hand still clutched tightly in his. Behind them, Preston stood motionless, his perfect composure cracked. The other diners slowly returned to their meals, but the whispers continued. No one in that room understood what they had just witnessed. 2 strangers from opposite ends of the world, brought together by a cupcake in a plastic container and a child's silent tears. The table was set with white linen and crystal glasses that caught the light like small chandeliers. Marcus sat across from Victoria Hartwell, the plastic container with his homemade cupcake, looking almost absurd next to the fine china. Lily sat between them, her legs swinging beneath the chair, too short to reach the floor. For a long moment, no one spoke. Marcus kept his hands folded in his lap, unsure what to do with them, while Victoria studied the menu with an expression that revealed nothing. Lily broke the silence. She looked directly at Victoria and asked what her name was, why she was eating alone, and whether she had any friends. The questions came out in a rush, the way children speak when they have not yet learned to filter their thoughts. Marcus started to apologize, but Victoria held up her hand slightly. She told Lily her name was Victoria and that she had many partners. Lily tilted her head, considering this answer with surprising seriousness. Then she said that partners were not the same as friends. Her father had told her that friends were the people who stayed with you when you were sad. Victoria looked at the little girl for a moment, something flickering behind her eyes that she quickly suppressed. The waiter approached, and Victoria began to order several dishes, but Marcus interrupted her. His voice was polite but firm when he said they would order for themselves, only what they could pay for. Victoria studied him, recognizing something in his posture, not embarrassment, but dignity. This was not a man looking for charity. He was a man who had walked into this restaurant with his head held high and intended to leave the same way. She nodded once and said nothing more about it. They ordered modestly. Lily got pasta with butter, and Marcus chose the least expensive entree on the menu. When the food arrived, Lily carefully opened the plastic container and showed Victoria the cupcake inside. She announced proudly that her father had made it himself, that he made the best cakes in the whole world. The frosting was slightly lopsided, and there was only a single candle pressed into the top, but Lily looked at it like it was the most precious thing she had ever seen. Victoria found herself staring at that cupcake longer than made sense. In a restaurant where desserts cost $50 and came with gold leaf, this small, imperfect thing made by a father's hands carried more weight than anything on the menu. She asked Marcus if he baked often. He shook his head and admitted he was not very good at it, that his wife used to handle the baking, but he was learning. The past tense hung in the air. Victoria did not ask, and Marcus did not explain. Some things did not need words. Lily finished half her pasta before she looked up at Victoria again. She asked if Victoria had a father. The question was innocent, the way only a child's question can be, but it landed somewhere deep and unexpected. Victoria was quiet for several seconds. Then she said that she used to, a long time ago. Lily nodded as if this made perfect sense and returned to her dinner. Marcus found himself talking. He told Victoria about his work, about fixing pipes in buildings all over the city, about the 12-hour days and the calluses on his hands. She asked questions that surprised him, specific questions about the job, about the physical toll, about what it felt like to work in buildings owned by people who never looked at you. He realized she was actually listening, not performing politeness but genuinely interested. He asked who she was, this woman who could silence a room with a single look. Victoria's answer came slowly. She said she was someone more accustomed to being feared than liked. There was no self-pity in her voice, just a statement of fact, like describing the weather. Marcus looked at her differently after that. Near the end of the meal, Lily reached into the small bag she had brought and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to Victoria and announced it was a present. Victoria unfolded it carefully. Inside was a crayon drawing of 3 figures holding hands, a tall man, a small girl with a blue dress, and a woman with yellow hair. Lily had written their names above each figure in shaky letters. Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she held the paper. She asked Lily why she had drawn her in the picture. Lily shrugged as if the answer were obvious. She said it was because Victoria had been with them on her birthday, so now she was part of it. Marcus watched Victoria's face and saw something he had not expected, a softness breaking through the careful control, there for just a moment before she tucked it away again. They parted outside the restaurant. Victoria's car was waiting at the curb, black and gleaming, a driver standing ready. She shook Marcus's hand and told Lily she hoped she had a wonderful year being 6. Then she was gone, disappearing into the back seat and into the night. Marcus stood on the sidewalk, holding his daughter's hand, watching the tail lights vanish around a corner, wondering if he would ever see that woman again. 2 weeks later, Marcus received a work order for a plumbing job at a penthouse apartment in Tribeca. When he arrived at the address and the door opened, Victoria Hartwell was standing on the other side. She looked almost embarrassed, which seemed impossible for someone like her. She explained that there was a strange noise coming from somewhere in the pipes, that she was not sure what it was, but it had been bothering her for days. Marcus spent an hour checking every pipe in the apartment. There was nothing wrong, no leaks, no blockages, no strange noises. When he told her this, Victoria nodded as though she had expected as much. She offered him coffee, and against his better judgment, he accepted. They sat in her living room surrounded by art that probably cost more than his annual salary. She asked about Lily, and he found himself talking about his daughter's school, her drawings, the way she still slept with the teddy bear he had given her for her birthday. Victoria listened the way she had at the restaurant, completely, without interruption, as if his words mattered. The meetings continued. Victoria would appear near Lily's school in Queens, claiming she had a business appointment in the area. Lily would spot her and run over, grabbing her hand and insisting they go for ice cream. Marcus knew these encounters were not coincidental. No CEO had that many appointments in a working-class neighborhood, but he did not say anything. He watched his daughter laugh with this woman who seemed so out of place in their world, and he felt something loosening in his chest that had been tight for 2 years. One evening, after Lily had fallen asleep on the couch during a movie, Marcus and Victoria sat together in his small kitchen. The apartment was cramped and old, the furniture secondhand, the walls thin enough to hear the neighbors arguing 2 doors down. Victoria looked around without judgment, and Marcus realized this was the first time she had seen how he lived. She started talking. She told him about Brooklyn, about the apartment where she grew up, even smaller than this one. Her mother had worked as a waitress, double shifts every day, coming home smelling like grease and other people's food. Her father had left on her 7th birthday, just walked out the door and never came back. No note, no explanation, no goodbye. She had waited by the window for 3 days, convinced he would return. She told Marcus that she had promised herself she would never be powerless again. She had built her company from nothing, climbed higher than anyone expected, surrounded herself with success and money and control. And in doing so, she had made sure no one could ever get close enough to leave her. The walls she had constructed were perfect, impenetrable, and completely empty. Marcus listened without speaking. When she finished, he said that she had achieved everything she set out to do. She had it all. Victoria looked at him, then looked through the doorway at Lily sleeping peacefully on the couch, and said she had thought the same thing until she saw the way he looked at his daughter. That was when she realized she did not have anything at all. The photograph appeared on a gossip website 3 days later. Someone at the restaurant, or maybe on the street, had captured Victoria walking with Marcus and Lily, the 3 of them laughing at something off camera. The headline asked whether the CEO of Hartwell Industries had a secret family. Comments speculated about scandal, about publicity stunts, about a powerful woman slumming it with a working-class man for attention. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. They expressed concerns about company image, about stock prices, about what investors might think. Competitors began circling, sensing weakness, suggesting that Victoria had lost her focus. For the first time in years, her position felt less than solid. Marcus saw the article on his phone while waiting for Lily at school. By the time he got home, he had read through dozens of comments, strangers dissecting his life, mocking his clothes, questioning what kind of man dated a woman for her money. His jaw was tight when Victoria called that evening. She started to explain, to apologize, but he cut her off. He told her he was not her publicity stunt. He was not a story for people to gossip about. His daughter had already lost her mother, and he would not let her become entertainment for bored strangers on the internet. Victoria tried to respond, but Marcus kept talking. He said their worlds did not belong together. He thanked her for everything she had done, for that night at the restaurant, for being kind to Lily. But it had to end here. Victoria stood in her empty penthouse, holding the phone to her ear, listening to silence after he hung up. She was used to controlling outcomes, to negotiating until she got what she wanted. But there was no negotiation here. Marcus had made his decision, and she could not buy or command her way past it. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt completely helpless. 3 weeks later, Marcus came home to find an envelope taped to his door. Inside was a notice from his landlord. The building had been sold to a real estate development company. All tenants had 30 days to vacate. Marcus read the letter twice, the words blurring together. He had lived in this apartment for 8 years. Lily had taken her first steps in the living room. Sarah had spent her last months in the bedroom down the hall. He spent the next week searching for a new place, but everything in his price range was either too far from Lily's school or too dangerous for a child. Deposits required first and last month's rent, plus fees he could not afford. The medical bills still sat unpaid in his drawer. He picked up extra shifts, worked until his body ached, and still came up short. Then the second blow came. A lawyer contacted him on behalf of Sarah's parents, the Caldwells, a wealthy family from Connecticut who had opposed the marriage from the beginning. They had barely spoken to Marcus after Sarah's death, had shown no interest in their granddaughter for 2 years. Now they were filing for custody of Lily. The legal documents cited Marcus's financial instability, his inability to provide adequate housing, his failure to maintain a suitable environment for a child. Lily overheard the phone call. She appeared in the doorway of his bedroom, her face pale, asking if someone was going to take her away. Marcus dropped to his knees and pulled her into his arms. He promised her that no one would ever separate them, that he would fight with everything he had. But holding her small body against his chest, feeling her tears soak through his shirt, he was not sure how much fight he had left. Victoria learned about the eviction notices through a routine report that crossed her desk. The Queens Redevelopment Project, a plan to demolish older residential buildings and replace them with luxury condominiums, had been approved 6 months ago. She had signed off on it herself, one of dozens of projects in the pipeline, numbers on a spreadsheet, profit margins calculated to the decimal. She pulled the file and looked at the list of affected addresses. Marcus's building was there, highlighted in yellow, scheduled for demolition in 90 days. The company that had purchased it, the company that had sent those eviction notices, was Hartwell Industries, her company, her signature on the authorization. Victoria sat alone in her office as the sun set over Manhattan, casting long shadows across the contracts and reports that surrounded her. She had built an empire by making decisions exactly like this one: calculated, efficient, profitable. She had never asked who lived in those buildings, who would be displaced, whose lives would be upended. They were externalities, acceptable losses. Now, one of those acceptable losses was a man who had shown her what she was missing, and a little girl who had drawn her into a family portrait with crayons. She looked at the drawing, still pinned to the wall beside her desk, the only piece of art in her office that had not been selected by a professional curator. 3 figures holding hands, a tall man, a small girl in a blue dress, a woman with yellow hair. And she had to decide what kind of person she was going to be. Victoria sat alone in her penthouse that night, the city lights spreading out beneath her like a sea of indifferent stars. The drawing Lily had given her lay on the coffee table, 3 crayon figures holding hands, their smiles simple and certain. Beside it sat the old photograph of her mother, the one from Brooklyn, the cramped kitchen, the worn linoleum floor. 2 images from 2 different worlds, yet somehow they felt like the same question asking itself across 30 years. Her mother had worked until her hands cracked and bled, had given everything so her daughter could climb out of poverty. Before she died, she had held Victoria's hand in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and said that success meant nothing if you forgot where you came from. Victoria had nodded and promised to remember. Then she had spent the next 20 years forgetting. She called an emergency board meeting the following morning. The directors assembled in the conference room with confused expressions, checking their watches, wondering what crisis demanded their attention at 7 in the morning. Victoria stood at the head of the table and announced that the Queens redevelopment project would be restructured. The existing residential buildings would be preserved. Affordable housing for current tenants would be guaranteed. There would be no evictions. The room erupted. Board members shouted about projected losses, about shareholder expectations, about the millions of dollars they had already invested. One director slammed his hand on the table and demanded to know if she had lost her mind. Victoria waited until the noise subsided. Then she said that she had built this company from nothing with her own hands. She had earned the right to decide what it stood for, and it would no longer stand for destroying the homes of people who had nowhere else to go. The custody hearing took place 2 weeks later in a family court in Lower Manhattan. Marcus sat at a table with a lawyer he could barely afford, a young woman fresh out of law school who had taken his case at a reduced rate. Across the aisle, the Caldwells had assembled a team of 3 attorneys in expensive suits, their briefcases stuffed with documents designed to prove that Marcus Bennett was unfit to raise his own daughter. The Caldwells themselves sat in the front row. Sarah's mother with her pearl necklace and pressed lips, Sarah's father with his silver hair and the cold eyes of a man accustomed to winning. They had not spoken to Lily in 2 years. They had not attended Sarah's funeral. Now they wanted to take her away from the only parent she had left. Marcus kept his hands flat on the table to stop them from shaking. He had prepared a statement, had rehearsed what he would say, but the words felt hollow against the weight of the Caldwells' resources. He was a plumber from Queens, with unpaid medical bills and a stack of eviction notices. They were old money from Connecticut, with connections that reached into every corner of the legal system. The courtroom doors opened, and Victoria Hartwell walked in. She wore a simple gray dress, no jewelry, her hair pulled back from her face. She did not look at the Caldwells or their lawyers. She walked directly to the front of the room and asked the judge for permission to speak as a character witness for Marcus Bennett. The Caldwells' lead attorney objected immediately, questioning her relevance, her relationship to the case, her motives. The judge studied Victoria for a long moment, then allowed her to proceed. Victoria turned to face the courtroom. She said she had met many people in her life, people who possessed everything the world could offer, yet owned nothing of real value. She had seen wealth without warmth, success without substance, power without purpose. Marcus Bennett had none of those things. He had a small apartment and a difficult job, and a pile of bills he would probably never finish paying. But he also woke up every morning and made breakfast for his daughter. He worked 12-hour days so she would never feel poor. He had spent 3 months saving $20 at a time so he could take her to a nice restaurant for her birthday. And when Victoria had offered to help him, to make his life easier, he had refused because he did not want his daughter to learn that happiness could be bought. She looked directly at the judge. She said that if the court removed Lily from her father's care, they would not be protecting her. They would be taking away the one person who had never stopped fighting for her, the one person who loved her without conditions or calculations or expectations of return. There was silence in the courtroom. Then a small voice spoke from the back of the room. Lily had been sitting with a court-appointed guardian, instructed to stay quiet, but she stood up and asked if she could say something too. The judge hesitated, then nodded. Lily walked to the front of the room, her blue dress with white flowers now slightly too short, her hands clasped in front of her. She said she just wanted to stay with her daddy. She said he was the only one who sang to her when she missed her mommy. Her voice did not waver. She was 6 years old, and she knew exactly what she wanted. The judge ruled in Marcus's favor. The Caldwells' petition was denied. Lily ran to her father, and he held her so tightly that for a moment he forgot anyone else was in the room. Outside the courthouse, Marcus found Victoria standing alone by the steps. He asked her why she had done it, why she had risked her reputation, her company, everything she had built, for a man who had pushed her away. Victoria looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before, something unguarded, something true. She told him she had lost everything that mattered a long time ago. She had just been too busy acquiring things to notice. Meeting him and Lily had shown her what she had been searching for without knowing it. Marcus asked what that was. Victoria said it was a reason to come home. Marcus took her hand. He told her he had been wrong to think that accepting help meant weakness. Sarah had tried to tell him that, but he had been too proud to listen. Victoria was not offering him charity. She was offering to stand beside him. That was different. 1 year later, on Lily's 7th birthday, the celebration took place in Marcus's new apartment in Queens. It was still modest. Small rooms, secondhand furniture, neighbors whose voices carried through thin walls. But it was theirs. A few of Marcus's co-workers came, along with some families from the building. Victoria arrived early to help with decorations, though her attempts to hang streamers resulted in more tape on her fingers than on the walls. The cake was a cupcake, just like last year, made by Marcus with the expensive vanilla extract. This time, Victoria had helped with the frosting, and her contribution was lopsided and messy. But Lily declared it perfect. They lit a single candle, and everyone sang, while Lily squeezed her eyes shut and made her wish. Marcus asked her what she had wished for. Lily smiled and said she could not tell him, because then it would not come true. But she added that her wish from last year had already come true, so she knew this one would too. Victoria sat on the floor beside Lily, her designer clothes covered in frosting, laughing at something the little girl had whispered in her ear. It was the first real laugh Marcus had heard from her, unguarded and full. On the wall behind them hung Lily's drawing from that night at Le Ciel, now framed. 3 figures holding hands, a tall man, a small girl in a blue dress, a woman with yellow hair. Marcus looked at them, these 2 people who had somehow found each other across an impossible distance, and understood something he had resisted for a long time. Family did not require perfection. It did not require wealth or status or a house with enough rooms. Family only required people who chose to stay, and sometimes it began with a stranger who stood up in a crowded restaurant and refused to let a little girl be turned away on her birthday.